Shalom. After a couple of months that I was in the States, I'm back home here in our studios in the community of Ofra in Benjamin, and I'm happy to be here again. As you can see, I look a little altered for what I usually look like. The beard that I'm wearing is part of the 30 days of mourning for the death of my father, Izzy, also known as Israel, the son of Aaron and Miriam. My father died about 30 days ago. I'm finishing the 30 days of mourning, and in those 30 days we don't shave or cut our hair. And I just wanted to say a few words about my father also, and this actually will fit in with my message about Russia, Ukraine, Crimea, which may turn out to be one or two parts of the YouTubes. I know many of you are interested in knowing about Russia, about Ukraine, about Crimea, about the things that are happening now in Eastern Europe. And so I'm going to talk also about my father, talk also about Russia, Ukraine, Crimea. And like I said before, we will see as the time goes, will we do two YouTubes or only one on this subject? So firstly, I wanted to talk a little bit about my father. Izzy was born actually in the United States in 1915, and then immediately after he was born, brought to Argentina, where he was raised. And the story of my father and his family, I think, is a very, very Jewish story. It is also a story about a miracle. And the miracle is that all of you who are watching this YouTube know that the Jewish people are a very, very small group of people. We are not numerous like all the other nations. Theoretically, we are as old as the Chinese and the Hindus and other groups, and we should have been over 1 billion people today had God had a plan for that. God's plan was different, though, and God says in the Holy Torah that some horrible things were going to happen to us, and that there would be actually a small remnant left over. And that's exactly what happened. If you read Deuteronomy 28, our family originates, my father's side of the family originates with King David, because we are descended from Rabbi Israel of Salan's family, from the brother of Rabbi Israel of Salant. And if you go to the Mea Sharim neighborhood in Jerusalem, you ask any rabbi there, and they will say, "Oh, Rabbi Israel of Salant, these are the descendants of King David." So at least we know that my family goes back to Judah. I'm also going to talk a little bit about my mother's family, my mother's family was from Warsaw, Poland. And we know also that my family goes back to a special relationship between my forebear and the King of Poland, who was actually Norwegian. That's how I got my blue eyes, according to the hospital and the DNA reports. The Jewish people are a people that have mixed with many, many nations all over the world. I think today, if America is known as the melting pot, Israel is known as the pressure cooker. We have the same types of immigrants coming from all over the world, just as the United States has, but we are a small, complex country under tremendous pressure from enemies who want to wipe us off the face of the map. As I said just a moment before, we are descended on my father's side, my father's father's side, from Rabbi Avi Lipkin of Salant. He was a great rabbi. His famous writings and teachings are from about 1850. And Rabbi Israel of Salant had a nephew who was my great-great-grandfather, David Lipkin. And his son, David Lipkin's son, was Abraham, who was my great-grandfather. And when Russia defeated Poland in the 1800s, a lot of the Jewish people all of a sudden in Poland, who were allies of the King of Poland, found themselves within the borders of Tsarist Russia. And the Russian leadership did not like the Jews, neither did the Ukrainians like the Jews, because the Jews were known as the agents of the King of Poland. Poland was a great empire. I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes when I talk about my mom's family. But my father's family found itself fleeing from the draft. The Russian army was now drafting Jewish kids, age 12, to the Russian army for a period of 25 years. This was usually considered a death sentence because these Jewish kids who were drafted into the Russian army at age 12 usually died from the harsh conditions within a year. So whenever poor Jewish families who did not have the money to bribe the Russian officials heard that their children were on the list to be drafted into the Russian army, they would basically tell their children, get out, get on the road, and leave Russia immediately, go to some other country. And my grandfather was 12, his brother Yasha was 14, Yaakov. And so my grandfather was 12 and my great uncle who was 14 basically trekked. Okay, now listen carefully. They trekked from a place called Dnepropetrovsk. My family was from Dnepropetrovsk, and they basically walked like 1,000 miles from one end of what is today the Ukraine all the way to Odessa. And I don't know if they hitched a ride on the train or whatever. And then they took a steerage passage on a ship to Argentina. Now, Judaism is kind of like karate. You know, you hear about karate or judo or kung fu. These are disciplines. In order to be successful in karate, judo, or kung fu, you have to be very disciplined. You have to learn a lot of new rules, and you have to live very strictly by those rules. Otherwise, you're not going to be in the karate academy anymore. And so, if my grandfather at age 12 was uprooted from his family, and actually his father died when he was 32, so they were struggling to survive, very poor people. And so even though just a generation before, David Lipkin was the understudy to one of the greatest rabbis in Jewish history, all of a sudden my grandfather, who was 12, was uprooted without the ability of learning about what it is to be a Jew. He kind of knew as a young kid, but his Jewish education ended at age 12. And from there, took a boat to Argentina. Around age 15, my grandfather married my grandmother, who was 14. People used to get married very young in those days because they had to get married to stay alive. And the story of my grandfather, Aharon, after whom my son Aaron Lipkin is named, this grandfather basically had to work until his death 7 days a week as a tailor. And my grandma, Maria, also had to work full-time 7 days a week. My father grew up in Argentina as a very poor child, and he would find himself getting up early in the morning, his parents working very hard, didn't have time to pay any attention to him, and he would be out in the street very young, and he would be with his Argentine friends. He was 5, 6 years old, and they would be playing in the street and in Argentina. There were no Jews in the neighborhood where they lived. And usually the Catholic priest would come and gather up all the children and take them to the church, where probably they were fed. And I was very surprised. My father died at the ripe age of 99 years and 2 months. And I was surprised to hear my father reciting Catholic prayers that he had learned with his friends in the Catholic Church. They were his brothers, they were his friends. My father never experienced any anti-Semitism at all in Argentina with the Argentine Catholics. And all he knew was that he was Jewish, but my father never had a Hebrew education. He could not learn how to pray, go to synagogue. He didn't know about Shabbat or any of the Jewish rules. And when he and my mom met and married, and then they moved to the United States in 1947, it was decided that I and my brother and sister would go to Hebrew school and learn about what it is to be Jewish, because they knew they were Jewish, but that's all they knew. They had been basically destroyed by the Russian Tsarist canton. The canton was the registration and drafting of Jewish kids into the Russian army. And thanks to my father sending me to Hebrew school in 1955, I began little by little to learn Hebrew and learn the Jewish traditions and go to synagogue and keep kosher, and eventually to move to Israel. And I would say that that is a miracle in itself. And then when I came to Israel, I met my wife Rachel, and we had the two most wonderful sons in the world, Aaron and Jacob. Again, Aaron named after one grandfather, and Jacob named after another grandfather. And my two sons make me very proud as Israelis, as Jewish men and fathers. And all of this really is thanks to my father having sent me to Hebrew school when I was a young kid. And the reason I'm telling you this very, I don't want to say boring story, is because this is one of the stories of the Jewish people. The Jewish people has been scattered to the four corners of the earth. And many Jewish people either abandon Judaism completely, or they intermarry, or they don't get married at all, or they don't have children at all. And here was an ember taken out of a fire. The fire was extinguished by the Russian Tsarist government. And this little ember made it to Argentina, and then my father continued that little burning ember to the US. And here I am back in Israel with my two sons and my family, and we have started a big flame. The fire of Israel, the fire of God, the fire of the Torah is back. And so I just wanted to pay homage to my father and to thank him, and my mother, of course, for having done what they did for us 100 years ago. That was my grandparents 100 years ago, and my parents 50 years ago. And now my two sons and my wife and grandkids are continuing this here in the Jewish state of Israel. Shalom.